Welcome to the online experience here at Bay Life Church. So glad that you decided to join us today. I want to welcome you to the last week in our series that we've entitled Ask It. Throughout this series, we've been chasing a single question because we believe this question is so clarifying that it will actually help us make better decisions and have fewer regrets. Now, if you've been tracking with us online or in person throughout this series, you know what the question is. The question is simply this: what is the wise thing to do? In week 1, we introduced the question. In week 2, we had the 4 chairs up here, remember? From the book of Proverbs, we talked about the seat of wisdom, the seat of the simple, the fool, and the mocker. And we said that we wanted to do everything possible to get to and stay in the seat of wisdom, because the seat of wisdom, that's where the favor of God descends. That's where happily ever after begins. That's where financial prosperity is built, where long-term relationships are fostered. The seat of wisdom is where we want to be and where we want to stay. And then in week 3 and 4, we took the question into kind of the lab of life and looked at 2 very particular areas in our life that have to be managed. It was time and our personal moral choices. And what we discovered is that if we would effectively use the question in those 2 areas, it would make life so much more livable. Well, here in the final week, we are going to take a different angle again. We're going to look at how this question was used over the course of one man's life. We're going to show how early in life he had the humility to ask the question, to ask for wisdom. In the mid-portion of his life, he had the discipline and the discernment to be able to apply wisdom. But then at the end of his life, he disengaged from wisdom, and what came next was that his life essentially unraveled. Well, before we get too far into that, I want to put the ball on the tee one more time. I want to use kind of the extended version of this question just for the sake of review. It goes like this: in light of my past experiences, my current circumstances, and my future hopes and dreams, what's the wise thing to do? Well, that's the question. But in order to get our thinking going in the right direction for the lesson today, I want to ask and answer real quickly 4 introductory questions. The first question is this: what is it that motivates us to ask the question? Well, I don't know about you. Maybe you're motivated by positive things. I tend to be motivated more by negative outcomes. So I would say the thing that motivates me to ask that question is a single word. It's the word regret. And think about it. When was the last time that you actually made a list of your regrets? Right? You know what that sounds like. It's the relationships you wish you had never started, the job you wish you hadn't accepted, the invitation that you wish you hadn't accepted, or the event you wish you hadn't attended, the money that you wish you hadn't spent, right? And when we get into that list of regrets, it stirs up a lot of emotion for us, and it leads us to the second question. The second question is this: why didn't I see it coming? That's the consequence, right? Why didn't I see the consequences of that decision coming? And the truth is this: if I didn't see it coming, but I should have seen it coming, then chances are someone saw it coming. And maybe I didn't listen to them, or maybe they didn't offer the advice because maybe in their past experience, I haven't been really good at listening. You see, if we go back to the concept of the seat of wisdom and the seat of the simple and the fool and the mocker, the longer I sit in the wrong seat, the less obvious the obvious becomes, right? If I sit there long enough in the wrong seat, I wouldn't recognize wisdom if someone gift wrapped it and dropped it in my lap. Now, let me say this. just because you can't see it coming in your own life doesn't mean you can't see it coming in someone else's, right? I think it's fairly certain that if your best friend were headed into a relationship that was wrong for them, you'd see that coming. If your kids were about to make a catastrophic mistake, you'd probably recognize that and be able to steer them around it. Or if someone at work that you cared about was about to make a foolish move that they've been making for the last 10 years, you'd see that coming for sure. So that really leads us to the third question. Why is it that I can't see it in my life, but I can see it in your life? Well, the answer to that is that we all have a blind spot that keeps us many times from being able to see it coming in our own life. What is it that creates that blind spot? Well, it's this, that every decision-making environment tends to be emotionally charged. And most people are not great at making great decisions in emotionally charged environments. What is it that makes an environment emotionally charged? Well, if you're making a decision, but your spouse is involved, well, now that's going to amp up the emotion. Or maybe you're making a decision that affects your kids, and so much is at stake for them that creates a lot of emotion. Or maybe you're making a financial or a career decision, and a lot of money is at stake. And that can ratchet up the emotion. And it's as if a cloud descends over the whole environment. And we don't make great decisions in the midst of emotion. See, this is why we could be terrible at managing our own money, but great at managing money at work. We might not have any idea how to fix our own marriage, but boy, I've got a lot of ideas about how my brother could fix his marriage. You may be baffled by the behavior of your own kids, but boy, the neighbor's kids, they just need to be spanked and sent to bed early, and they'll be just fine, right? You see, decision-making environments are crowded with emotions, and emotions make it really hard to make great decisions. So what is it that creates those emotions? What drives those emotions? They can be driven by a variety of things, by anger, lust, selfishness, narcissism, arrogance, insecurity. There's a dozen things that could drive those emotions, and those emotions make the obvious seem less obvious. So here's the fourth introductory question, and it's this: how does a wise person make wise decisions in the midst of an emotionally charged environment? That's a great question. It's one word. That word is this: it's listen. Listen, listen, listen. That's what a wise person does that's different than an unwise person. They're the wise person is someone who says, I'm a little emotional right now. I'm a little angry right now, or I'm a little lonely right now. And when I'm emotional or angry or lonely, I don't make great decisions. I may not be in a great headspace to make decisions for myself, by myself. Check it out. Wise people recognize that when they're in no condition to decide for themselves and by themselves. Quite often, when we're in an emotionally charged environment, we're terrible at making decisions for ourselves, by ourselves. Well, every week here at Bay Life, we always come to this question: what does God have to say about all of this? And while we're going to pop around to a couple of different paragraphs, it's all going to be in the pursuit of one man's life story. I want to reintroduce you to a man that we met earlier in the series. His name is Solomon, right? He's the third king in Israel. He's the son of David. He was a very wise man. In fact, the most wise person on the planet other than Jesus. Kings and queens came to him for advice. He captured all of his wisdom in a book called Proverbs. And to this day, that book is seen as the greatest book of wisdom on the planet. Well, we want to look at the scope of his whole life, and it's going to be a really simple message today. We're going to lift just 2 principles out of his life. 2 principles about how wisdom works. Well, here's the first principle. It says wisdom has a single source. This is what Solomon's life is going to teach us. Wisdom has a single source. The source is God and godly people, right? God and godly people. I want to take us to 1 Kings chapter 3, and this is going to be where we're going to hang out primarily, but check this out. Solomon is early in his reign. He has a vision, and he's actually conversing with God, and God asks him a question. He gives an answer. It says, at Gibeon, the Lord appeared to Solomon in a dream by night, and God said, ask what I shall give you. Now, that's a pretty powerful question coming from the Almighty, right? Ask anything, and I'll give it to you. And Solomon said, here it is. You have shown great and steadfast love to your servant David, my father. And now, O Lord my God, you have made your servant king in place of David, my father, although I am but a little child. Solomon was young. Catch this. I do not know how to go out or come in. I don't even know where to begin, Solomon says. And your servant is in the midst of your people whom you have chosen, a great people, too many to be numbered or counted for multitude. David had built and left a great kingdom. It says, give your servant therefore an understanding mind. This is what he's asking for. He's asking for wisdom. To govern your people, that I may discern between good and evil. For who is able to govern this, your great people? What Solomon said is, I don't even know where to start. I don't understand the spiritual dynamics of good and evil when it comes to being a king and governing an entire kingdom of people. People that are too many to even be numbered. So what do we learn straight up front? Well, that there's a single source for wisdom, and that's God and godly people. So maybe you're about to step into a marriage. Maybe you just stepped out of one. Maybe you're about to start a new job, or you're going to make a huge financial decisions. We ought to ask for the same thing Solomon asked for. God, give us an understanding mind. When it comes to marriage, or it comes to this new job, or it comes to this financial decision, I have no idea where to begin. I don't understand how the spiritual dynamics are working. Please give me an understanding mind. So what was God's response? It was pretty spot on. It says it pleased the Lord that Solomon had asked this. Love that. God is pleased in what he's asked. It says, and God said to him, because you've asked this and have not asked for yourself long life or riches or the life of your enemies, but have asked for yourself understanding to discern what is right, behold, I now do according to your word. He said, I'm going to give you what you asked for. Behold, I will give you a wise and a discerning mind, so that none like you has been before you, and none like you shall arise after you. You're going to be without peers. I give you also what you have not asked. So this is the cool part, right? Both riches and honor, so that no other king shall compare with you all of your days. And if you will walk in my ways, keeping my statutes and my commands, as your father David walked, then I will lengthen your days. So God, in response to Solomon's request for wisdom, he made 2 types of promises. He made some unconditional promises, meaning they were without condition. They were going to happen based upon the name and word and character of God. And then he gave one conditional promise. He said, I'm going to give you what you asked for. I'm going to give you wisdom, a wise and a discerning mind. And then I'm going to give you the things you didn't ask for, right? I'm going to give you great riches and I'm going to take care of your enemies and you're going to be at peace. And he said, I'm going to give you all of that. Those were unconditional. That was going to happen. And then he said, there's one conditional promise. If you'll obey my commands, if you will follow me as your father David did, heart first. David was a man after God's own heart. If you'll be that guy, then I'm going to lengthen your days. What an incredible response because of Solomon's very wise decision to ask for wisdom and an understanding mind rather than all the other things that all the other kings asked for. So we've got to ask the question, what was the outcome, right? What was the impact of him asking this decision? Well, we're going to skip ahead to the next chapter, 1 Kings chapter 4. It says, and God gave Solomon wisdom and understanding beyond measure, and breadth of mind like the sand on the seashore. It's just extended forever. And people of all nations came to hear the wisdom of Solomon, and from all the kings of the earth who had heard of his wisdom. Right? Solomon, quite simply, sat in the seat of wisdom. Remember, the seat of wisdom is where the favor of God descends, where happily ever after begins, where financial prosperity is built, lifetime relationships are fostered, where the joy of the Lord lives. Solomon was in that coveted seat, the seat of wisdom. Here's the really cool thing. He didn't just ask for wisdom on the front end. Throughout his life, he perpetually pursued wisdom. He kept seeking it. Even though he was already wise, he sought more instruction. He sought to have greater wisdom. In fact, in his book on wisdom, the book of Proverbs, he's constantly instructing the wise to try to become more wise, to seek greater instructions, to follow the commands of the Lord more closely. Let me just give you a sampling of those instructions from Solomon's book of Proverbs. In Proverbs 9, verse 9, it says, instruct the wise, and they will be wiser still. That's how a wise person responds to instruction. Proverbs 1:5, it says, a wise man will hear and increase in learning. A man of understanding will acquire wise counsel. He'll ask and he'll listen to that counsel. Final one here, Proverbs 19:20, listen to advice, accept discipline, and at the end, you'll be counted among the wise. Solomon was constantly seeking to pursue wisdom. Well, there's a second principle, and this we find as we come toward the end of Solomon's life. And it's kind of sad, is that he disengaged from wisdom and his life began to unravel a bit. Here's the second principle. You should write this down. Wisdom is not a perpetual possession. Just because you ask for wisdom and receive it doesn't mean you'll always have it. You can, as Solomon did, disengage from wisdom. And when he did disengage, he stopped seeking counsel. He made personal and professional decisions that were unwise. And then his great wealth was squandered. His kingdom would be divided in the next generation as his son was not wise at all. His influence dissipated. All that he had gained by the pursuit of wisdom went away when he disengaged and stopped pursuing wisdom. Wisdom is not a perpetual possession. Well, if the book of Proverbs is Solomon's kind of assembling all of his wisdom, the book of Ecclesiastes, which he also wrote toward the end of his life, is kind of what happened when he disengaged from wisdom. What we find in the book of Ecclesiastes is not prescriptive for our life, it's descriptive of what happened in Solomon's life. I've lifted one paragraph out of the beginning of the book, Ecclesiastes chapter 1, where he kind of describes pursuing wisdom and then pursuing other things. Check it out. He said, I said in my heart, I've acquired great wisdom. So he's looking back over his life and saying, hey, I've acquired a lot of wisdom. surpassing all who were over Jerusalem before me. So the two kings that went before me, I have far greater wisdom than they did. And my heart has had great experience of wisdom and knowledge. So as he looks to the past, he's like, man, I did it. I accumulated all of this wisdom, and I've disciplined myself to apply all of this wisdom. But now there's a shift as he gets to the end of his life. He said, I applied my heart to know wisdom, and, meaning also, at the end of my life, I began to chase some lesser pursuits. What are they? To know madness and folly, entertainment. I perceived that this also was a striving after the wind. Man, after having built a life upon wisdom, he goes to this broad experimentation of other things like entertainment and pleasure and addiction and the accumulation of wealth, and you fill in the blank. Solomon chased it. And later in the book, when he gets to the end of his life and he looks back at those other lesser pursuits, here's what he says in summary. He said, vanity. All is vanity. It's nothingness. Chasing after the wind. So how does someone who had such great wisdom disengage from wisdom and drift to a place where he would describe his life with these terms? It's a grievous evil. It's an unhappy business. In Ecclesiastes, that's how he described the end of his life. Now, how did Solomon end up there? More importantly, how do you and I end up there? Well, I want to give you 4 things to consider, and then we're going to be done. We want to give you 4 things that are shaped around a single question. Why is it that we stop pursuing wisdom? Why do we stop listening to wisdom? Why do we halt the perpetual pursuit of wisdom? I don't know which one of these answers is going to resonate with you, but I found in all 4 of them something at some season in my life that has been specific to me. The first reason I think that we stop is we already know what the wise are going to say, and we don't want to hear it, right? We begin to act like a 15-year-old and say, I know. I've heard the sermon before. You can keep it to yourself, right? Knowing the truth, knowing the instruction, and applying it are completely different. But sometimes we stop listening to wisdom simply because we've heard it before. Secondly, we stop listening to wisdom because we don't think it's anyone's business. My little side hustle at the office that the boss doesn't know about, yeah, that's not his business. And my little dalliance outside of my marriage, that's nobody's business. That just affects me. It's just about me. Let me offer you some counsel if you're open to it. You see, private decisions have very public consequences. The results of personal decisions very rarely are limited in their impact to just me, right? That stuff that we think is nobody's business, if it goes sideways, is about to be everybody's business. So why do we stop listening? Reason number 3, we become intoxicated with success, right? The more successful I am somewhere in my life, the smarter I think I am everywhere, right? If I'm successful at home, or I'm successful at the office, or I'm successful in business, or when it comes to money and finances, well, then I just think I've got the whole thing rigged. And I don't need to hear wisdom anymore from anyone else in any area of my life, because if I'm successful somewhere, I think I'm smarter everywhere. And I just don't need to listen. You see, success insulates us from a deep felt need and desperation for wisdom. There's one last reason, and that's this: we become humiliated by failure. If someone begins to offer counsel and we feel like we're failing, we tend to disengage from counsel. We tend to head to the door. Counsel is never more needed, never more painful than when I'm failing personally or professionally or spiritually. So, if I've stopped listening to wisdom, if like Solomon I've disengaged from it, how do I get back? How do I go from the seat of the simple or the fool or the mocker? How do I get back to the seat of wisdom? Well, we get back the same way we got there in the first place. We have to ask it, right? We have to ask the question that helps us make better decisions and have fewer regrets. What is that question? It's this: in light of my past experience, all that's gone before, my current circumstances, in light of what I'm currently facing, and my future hopes and dreams, what is the wise thing to do? I really hope that this series has been helpful to you. If you think it would be helpful to a friend, you can send them to our website at baylife.cc. And all of our messages are there, all of our resources. We'd encourage you to share it with a friend. I want you to know, Bay Life, that I love you so much, but God loves you even more. We'll see you next week.